Welcome to Entwined, the Constellation Chronicles, the podcast where we dive deep into the intricate web of family constellations and the profound stories that shape our lives. I'm your host, Alexis Gonzalez. I'm an author, speaker, and family constellations facilitator. In each episode, we'll be speaking with facilitators and thought leaders who explore the dynamic relationships that connect us all. Together, we'll uncover the hidden patterns, transformative experiences, and rich insights that family constellations reveals. Thank you for joining us on this journey as we explore the entwined stories of our past, the present moments we share, and the futures we're creating together. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. In today's episode, we'll be speaking with Marilene Metzler, who practices family constellations in Surrey in the United Kingdom. Marilene has a background in homeopathy since 1998 and has not only built a successful private practice, but also served as a lecturer and supervisor at Thames Valley University. Marilene's journey with family constellations began in her childhood, and she immersed herself in this transformative work starting in 2002. After extensive training and experience, she's now dedicated to sharing her knowledge through her own training program. Join us as we dive into her insights and expertise in this powerful practice. And for more information on Marilene, you can visit www.solutionsfocused.co.uk. So hello everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the Entwined, the Constellation Chronicles podcast. And today is going to be our first ever episode, which I'm so excited to introduce you to a facilitator that I met not very long ago, actually. We don't know each other extremely well, but I feel like at a soul level, we know each other well. So in the moment that we spoke over the last Zoom call that we had, I definitely felt like this is a really good fitting. I've never seen you actually work, but I can just tell from the small little moments that we've had together that you're very passionate about this work, have a lot of reverence and honor for doing this work for others. And also, I was thinking earlier, another thing I really like about you is I feel like you're very open to learning. So, and I notice myself, it's the same, even though I've been doing this for like 10 years, learning from many different teachers. I feel like I will always be for my whole life someone who's very open to learning. So that's how I feel like you are. So I'm really happy that you get to be the very first one here on this podcast. So I want to introduce you guys to Marilene Metzler. And she is actually from Surrey in the UK. And she has been doing constellations for 15 years as a facilitator. And 2 years prior to that, she began training in this work. But she has quite an interesting introduction to this work, which I would like to kind of switch it over to you to kind of share how you got into constellations. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Alexis, for this absolutely beautiful introduction, and really for connecting with me. I first encountered this work when I was about 13, and I'm from Switzerland. And around that time, the work in Germany was coming into Switzerland, and they were doing a lot of work on seeing how we can look at family constellations in the context of adoptions. Now, my sister, she's adopted from Brazil, and a family member of ours had already trained in this work, and she was asked whether my sister would come and do an experiment, do a constellation and see how we could apply this. And at the time, my sister said no, because she just didn't feel it felt a bit too overwhelming, maybe. So she allowed my mum to go on her behalf. And nobody apart from my mum and all the people who were there know what happened in the constellation. But I was only about 13. I sort of knew about it in the background. I wasn't really involved in it. I noticed around that time that there was a big shift in my sister's, just the way she was about her adoption, and things seemed to settle in our family. And about 2 years later, we received a letter from Brazil, from her mother, and she let us know that a little miracle had happened in Brazil, with her and my sister's father, who had not been allowed to be together, which is partly why that child had to be given away. And they actually got back together. And I didn't know this work. I wasn't deeply in this, but I just remember thinking, I wonder if, what if um, it was connected to this, because them getting together was very shortly after that constellation. But obviously at the time, it took a long time to receive letters from Brazil. So we only found out that much later. And so it always stuck with me. But I then went on to train as a homeopath. Sorry, do you want me to go on?
Yeah, keep going, keep going.
I wasn't sure. So I went on to train as a homeopath first, because that was the easy option to do. I came to England on a 2-week holiday, found out that over here I could train as a homeopath, whereas in Switzerland I had to have another profession first, or I had to be a minimum of 24 years old, and I was only 19 at the time. So I did my training, and a lot of it really resonated, that the model of health, of working with human beings as whole systems, completely made sense to me. But there was something that never quite settled. There was something that I always felt I was too much in charge of, or expected to be in charge of, my clients' healing, in terms of finding the right remedy for them. And it all hung for me a little bit on that remedy. And so I just carried on looking, because I knew that I hadn't quite found my thing yet. I hadn't quite found what I wanted to pass on in this world. And so in 2000, I went back to a Constellation event, actually the first one that I attended. And if I'm really honest, it wasn't a very good experience. It was probably an example of, yeah, it was a bit unfortunate how some of the constellations went. And yet, I don't know, there was something about it that really drew me to this work. And a little bit later, one of my friends at work, she had an issue going on, and I just went, why not try family constellations? And so my friend went and she found John Payne in the UK, and she went to this workshop, and she came back and she was like, oh my gosh, what's happened? I can't talk to anybody about it. Please, can I just, have a chat? And so we had a chat, and we spent, I say, 2 or 3 years just going to his workshops. But the moment I found him, I knew that was it. I would train in this. This is my thing. And so it wasn't long before I then found a place where I trained. And I was very lucky to be trained by Judith Hemming, Richard Wallstein, and Jutta ten Herkel, and learn from them, because they'd all learned from Bert Hellinger. And so
cool.
I never looked back. I still do homeopathy. I still love doing homeopathy, but there is something about this work that settles me incredibly deeply.
Yeah, I know that you were saying at the beginning of your work, Bert Hellinger, I know that he began in Germany, but he was starting to bring it out to different places and was more passionate about spreading the work in some way. And so would you say the people that you worked with, they are kind of part of that? That was the spreading of his work, what he wanted to share?
So in my childhood, when my sister took part in it, yes, they were his first, I don't know what they called them, his first generation of trainees. It was one of those facilitators who I and my aunt asked whether we would take part in this. So it was very early on in the work, and they had very little data, they had very little experience with how to apply this in adoptions at the time.
I think you shared that with me, that your sister was kind of part of the development, or maybe understanding of how this work can be brought into people who have been adopted in their lives, right?
That's right. She was one of the earlier constellations that Bert Hellinger's, I don't know, Bert Hellinger's people, the ones who went, you can't retire. Please, don't take this, for yourself. Please help us spread it. And I hope I'm doing Bert Hellinger justice, because I don't know if that's what the conversations was, because I wasn't there, but that's how I understand it. That these people, they went, come on, we will help you share it with the world. And so it came into Switzerland, and they started to go broader and broader and into adoption. And it was certainly part of a bit of research that they were doing, that we were asked to take part.
Do you have
Well,
any, I know that you weren't part of her constellation, but do you have any awareness of if it was like people who were directly training with him, or if it was him himself, or do you know any of those?
no,
Okay.
sadly, my aunt died, so I couldn't ask her who the facilitator was, but he was one of Bert Hellinger's first line of trainees.
Hmm. Oh, beautiful. So it makes sense that you felt very called to this work, because I was very much in the same place. I kind of shared with you yesterday where I had been on a journey for like 7, 8 years before I even ever encountered this work, and had done many different modalities. So I learned things like psychic development, mediumship. I even learned Reiki. I learned different kinds of meditation, sound meditation, like all these different kinds of things. And same for me, it was like nothing ever stuck. And it was like, I just feel like I haven't found the thing. And for me, I shared this in a past interview with the person who's working with me on retreats. And so she asked me, how did you encounter this work? And I said, I just heard the word, and I had the opportunity to train as a facilitator. So I jumped into like learning how to be a facilitator before I ever even did a workshop, before I ever even knew what it was, never Googled, nothing. So it's pretty cool. I told her I feel like it was kind of just a soul calling. It's like my soul knows where I should begin. And I guess I just decided as at a soul level, it's like you're just ready to facilitate. And I'm so happy. I told you yesterday too, I'm so happy it happened at the end of my journey, because then I knew um, many different many different ways that you can heal. And then that's how I knew that this for me was one of the most powerful ways. So, with that being said, do you have any stories that you're able to share about some of your clients, or their experiences, or even their resolutions that you've seen in their life from this book?
Yes, so the first thing I really want to be really clear about is that probably 50% of my clients, they come to workshops, they do a one-to-one piece of work, and I don't see them again. So I can't, talk for all of them. I don't go and check up with them. I feel that the contract is for the session, and I completely withdraw from their work. And so I
Really,
don't know,
really,
I'm
can I
probably
share
only talk
something?
for half of the people that I work with that I know about.
Really quickly,
And
can I share something with you? So I just got back from Alaska, which I told you, because we were like emailing back and forth in the middle of all that. I was so busy during that week. And this was like a week ago, a week or two ago. And one of the things that came up, because I had so many personal sessions that week, like everything was just full. And I noticed myself feeling this sense of a little bit of like overwhelm, because it's so much and it's so big, this work. And then as I was kind of meditating, I received this information, and I shared it with the people of the group as well, because I did like 2 workshops. I did like a speech as well. So I shared with them what I received, and what I received was, I call it my spirit guides, but you could call it whatever you want to call them. What I received was, this is not your work, this is my work. Because I was noticing myself wanting to see, like, how could I have facilitated better? How could I have said that better? And what I was being told is like, you have to like let it go in trust and surrender, and know that whatever happened in the constellation was what was meant to happen. And so that really helped me kind of let go of that feeling of like, oh, it's me, because it's not me. So when you said that, I was like, oh, yes, I was just told this. Yeah.
that reminds me of going off topic a bit, but it's really connected, is sometimes I have clients, they come back and they tell me, oh, do you know, it really helped me what you said. And they tell me something. And I know I would have never said it that way. I would have never seen it that way. But they heard me say it. I know there's no way I would have said it, but they heard something that helped them. And I think it's helped me to really withdraw and go, as you were saying, it's their piece of work. They will take from it what resonates with them. It doesn't matter what I see, it matters only what they see. And that little impulse can do, anything for them. And it can do something within their system for them if they want to take it. And likewise, they have, as far as I'm concerned, full permission to go, not for me. I'm going to take nothing from it. And I think that's perfectly okay too, at least for me. Of course, it is lovely when I hear back the stories, every so often comes back, sometimes a year later, and tells me a lovely story of, it was so amazing and this happened. And a very common one is somebody phoning up, you do a piece of work and they haven't spoken to their mother or their father for so long. And I still get amazed when this happens. And recently, again, somebody said, we did a reaching out movement. And a few days later, my mum called. I never hear from them. And they tell me she loves me. And it's like, this is worth all of it. It's worth all of the work for me when I hear stories like this. And I had a really lovely one where somebody had lost their child many years ago, many years ago, and could never go back to their grave. And we did a piece of work and really just making space for this child and that grief. And that person went that evening and went to the grave and just spent time there and reconnected with something that they hadn't been able to. So they are, they change everything in somebody's heart, soul, and how they hold something so painful.
Yeah, I feel moved when you said the reaching out movement and like reconnecting to family members that maybe we haven't been able to for years. And that's not why we do this work. I always tell people we do it for ourselves, even if they never change. Because for them too, they have their free will and their own choice of whether they want to keep we call them hidden loyalties to the family system, to people who came before them. And so we can't control them when we do a constellation. And sometimes I noticed it myself, even when I would go into constellations, like when I first began, it was like, and I can look back now, I wasn't conscious of it then, but I can definitely look back and see like, oh, I wanted my mom to be able to give me what she wasn't able to give me. And over time, I've seen myself kind of release that and really know at a very deep soul level of like, she has the choice to live however she wants to live. And me as the adult, I get to take care of my little inner child in the ways that she was wanting as she was growing. So yeah, I do love that, but it's not always. I don't want everyone to think as they're listening, like, oh, I'm going to be able to talk to my mom, because it's not always that way. But sometimes it brings you to more peace within yourself. And then also, like I said, being able to take care of your own inner child in the ways you weren't given as you grew up. So, yeah.
I would absolutely second that. And I would even add that I think when we do a piece and we do it because we think our mother will phone, she won't phone. It only happens in the total surrender when we give up, in a way, hoping and accepting what is. Miracles sometimes come out of that. But if we do it to manipulate, in my experience, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Beautiful. So there was a beginning that we had that I think we didn't get to.
Oh, what's the question?
Shoot. But everything happens for a reason. I guess this is what wanted to come out. So it's perfect. How funny. We were talking about stories. So if you have a story you'd like to share specifically, or was that the kind of your story?
That was a story, yes. And then actually, it just reminded me of somebody I worked with when I was only just starting out, and I'm probably still half training. I was working with a lady who'd come for homeopathy, and I knew there was a little they had lost twins. They were um premature, and over, I think it was 5 months, she lost one, and then she lost the other one, and could never ever, boxed everything away, could never go back to any of this. And in the homeopathy, it never really came out. The person wasn't able to really access that grief. And they came for something physical, totally unrelated, and couldn't see quite why that might be relevant. And so one day, I asked them, I said, just pick. They'd had 3 children afterwards. And so I just got this person to place the 3 children she'd had who lived, and then the 2 who were before that. And with that, this person just broke down and for the first time really saw herself as a mother 5, because they hadn't allowed themselves to feel that way. And then when they came back a month later, she said, for the first time I went and I had a little box in the attic, which I'd put away. And that was 20 years before. And they went and they opened up the box and just found the little things from the hospital and, whatever else was in there. And so it's such a privilege, to be part of those moments. And I think sometimes we want big change. We want, the world to change for us. But actually, when we can reconnect with the grief and the love we have, for me, that's the best thing I can do for a person.
I love that. Yeah. And you can't bring them back, right? But you can bring the peace. And also in Alaska as well, in one of the group sessions, I brought up in this field. That's why I love this work so much, because in this field, sometimes we're putting a blanket over something that's gross and stinky. And we're just like, oh, I forgave my mom, or, completely disassociating from really feeling what's actually deep down in our subconscious, or the things we hide from ourselves. And this work is about bringing it all up so that it can be surfaced, so we can process it, and so that we can make space for true and real, like, joy, and also love for life, and seeing all of the things that we've kind of hidden from ourselves. So do you have anything to say about that?
The image I work with is the wave, or the children, they are taken over by a wave, they express it all, and then he goes, and you go in the car and you go, oh, what was that? And as a parent, you're still livid with them, and they're going, oh, what's for dinner? And you're going, just give me a moment, I need to regather. But they have been able to ride the wave, they everything out of it. Whereas we probably only got so far, and then we were embarrassed because somebody was watching, or it was in a shop, or goodness knows what. And so we don't finish the movement, and we go into the compensatory feeling. And the constellation takes us back into the wave, exactly where we stopped it. And it allows us to finish it. And then it goes. And then it's done. And it doesn't need to be brought up again.
Yeah, that's also what my teacher says. She says it's perfect display when a child is feeling that primary emotion,
Yeah.
versus as an adult, we have the secondary emotion. It's kind of like the coping mechanisms of, like, oh, I'll just leave internally, like disassociating, or I'll run away, or I'll go, watch TV, or whatever it is, whatever the vice is. But the children, they know, and they, like, internally are like, I know I just have to let this thing out. Once I let it out, I'll go back and play. So that's what this is really getting us back to that soul level of feeling all those things. Yeah. And you brought up,
Wouldn't it be wonderful?
what were you gonna say?
No, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could live in a world where we're allowed some of that primary emotion again and be seen with it?
Well, and that's why I'm so passionate about this work, and also creating this podcast, because I want people to know this is available worldwide, everywhere. She's in the UK, and it's everywhere. I posted a post on Facebook, and that's kind of how I encountered Marilene, and many other facilitators from everywhere. So, like, Ireland, Germany, uh, what was it? Belgium, even New Zealand. It's like so cool to see all the different kinds of people and where they are. And I think putting this into the world is part of creating that in the world, because we're creating kind of like little pockets where it's safe for people to go in there and to not be judged for feeling whatever they need to feel. Their primary at a primary level, whatever is in there. So, and that's why I love this work, because it's so vulnerable and so raw. When people are really willing to share and give of themselves in such a vulnerable way, it's really beautiful and sacred when you get to see that little opening. Yeah.
I would absolutely agree with it. And I think sometimes some facilitators, it looks like you're not doing much, but actually what you're doing is you're creating that safe space, because you wouldn't be safe to behave or to express sometimes yourself that way if you just go out. And so what we do is we create a place where all of this is welcome and it's allowed to be seen. And it settles something in us when we see others. And I always look at people and think, you're in big of despair and you're so beautiful, so real, so true. And there's such a strength in that moment.
Yeah, and I also want to share it's not just the sadness, it's whatever is the primary emotion. So it could be anger. And so this is like really like making a safe place where you can feel even those things that you're taught are not okay or right. And it's a very healthy emotion to feel as well. And a lot of women, I noticed in myself, that was a tough one to get into. Generationally, it's something that we just carry from past generations. So not just the sadness and also the happiness. I've seen some really beautiful, like this is not just all bad things. Like I've seen some extremely beautiful, like feeling like the love you haven't been able to feel for years because there was protections up. So it is really beautiful work if you've never experienced it. But you brought up bringing in representatives. So I want to ask you about what do you use for representations? Because every facilitator has their own thing. And how did you come to using those items?
So in one-to-one work,
Yeah.
you mean? Yeah. In one-to-one work, I use loads of things, and sometimes I allow my clients to choose, and sometimes I choose for them. But I have crystals, I have Playmobiles, I have little plastic animals, I have painted rocks, I have felts, I use paper, I use cushions a lot. These cushions here, they have been everything. They
Well,
have been grandmothers, partners, all kinds of things. So it just depends on what either my client prefers to work with, or sometimes it just feels like I'm just going to choose one or the other. I think when I use the bigger pieces like the papers and the felts, I go more for the body experience. I want my client to really sit in this different positions and feel into it. And sometimes it's really useful to get an overview. So I might work more with the pebbles and the smaller pieces and put it on the table.
so when you do one-on-one sessions, is it mostly you do tabletop ones? Or you're saying when you decide to use the felts, that's when you're having them step into?
So when I have one-to-ones, when somebody's here or online, then online, what am I talking about? They choose whatever they have at home.
Yeah.
The only thing I might sometimes say, get a piece of paper and we'll write the different names down. But when it's here, I think I choose which way we're going to work, whether we're going to work full body, you standing in the different places, whether I do tabletop.
Mhm.
And then within that, they can choose the different bits, or sometimes they even mix Playmobil and crystals and rocks.
Yeah, I love to hear this because, well, first off, I know it gives, especially if, like for facilitators watching, which I would love to kind of have this as a resource for facilitators so that they can get ideas of like something that could be very helpful in their practice or what they do. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified of any new videos that come out. It's so helpful to grow this channel and to allow me to continue making these videos for you guys. Please do also leave a comment below of any new insights you've gotten or any extra insights you have about what we're talking about. Like my teacher has told me even about people who do like butterfly constellations. Have you ever heard of this?
Oh,
Yeah. So see, there's so many different ways it can be done. I've also heard of like element constellations where they use like earth, wind, fire kind of thing. I think Francesca Mason-Boring does that. Do you know who that is? Yeah.
yes, I've not seen her work, but I've heard of her.
Yeah, my teacher was trained by her as well. My teacher's been pretty trained by like lots of people. I really look up to her. She was really very, she loves this work so much. So, but yeah, so the butterfly constellation, it has to do with the different phases of the butterfly. So you have like 4 quadrants, and in each quadrant, it's like for developmentally. So like let's say it's about career, and you begin as I believe it's like the egg or the caterpillar, and then like all the way up until the blooming. I have to recheck with her, but I've done it before and it was pretty cool because you get to see the different stages of people's development and where they're going in the future as well. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, it can be done so many different ways. So that's why I like to ask about the different ways that or the different items that you use. Would you like to give, for people who are just beginning, maybe a very quick little rundown about what is family constellations? Maybe up to this point, they're like, what are they talking about?
What is family constellations?
Yeah, to you personally.
So for me, family constellations has really helped me deeply experience and understand that I am not alone ever. That even when I cut myself off from my family, from people around me, that innately I'm always connected to where I come from. And while I can pretend that they're not there, we are continuously communicating with one another, and we're affected by how we are feeling and what's happening to us. And if one person has a big thing going on, a big fate happening to them, it's not possible for me to run away from it. I'm part of it, and we're going to somewhere share this together. Whether I agree to this consciously or not is nothing to do with this. And it can really heal the notion that we're separate in this world. And it can help you, I don't know, feel carried by something much bigger. And I think this idea that I can just do what's right for me is a bit weak once you've experienced family constellations and you see how much we are actually held by the family field, by the cultural field, by the the earth that we are living on, by the humanity, by the country, and it becomes bigger and bigger. And actually, we're all weaving our own little path, but when it all comes together, it creates this beautiful picture, and it needs every single thread to make all of it. And so when we work systemically, we look at what part we are playing, what part we are carrying within the system. And if a thread has been taken out because it didn't look really pretty, we've never used this analogy before, but when you take it out because we didn't like it, it looked maybe a bit too dark, you will start to see that the picture isn't complete anymore and it doesn't look right. So somebody will try to paint over and pretend and fill the gap because it actually needs this thread here. And so what we do with family constellations is we bring the thread back in, and then the picture is complete again, and each person can play the part they are meant to play within the big field, not just a small field.
So you're talking about exclusions when someone in the family is excluded. So for you as a facilitator over the last 15 years, can you tell me maybe when you first began? Because I know this is like a big thing in the bigger, broader world, right? Where we want to immediately just cast somebody away if they do something. Like right now, what I'm noticing Do you know who Dave Grohl is? Or
No.
from Nirvana? So they're a band, and there's just this big thing going on because he's about to have a baby with someone outside of his marriage. And what I'm noticing is so much hate and how much is happening, where it's like this huge exclusion by so many people in the world because he's very big here. And so I noticed this pattern where a lot of humans, we want to immediately just cast somebody away for a choice they made, or maybe it was a mistake, or they fell in love with someone outside of their marriage. So can you tell me from the beginning, when you first started training, did you have a little pushback? Because I know I did. And then as I've kind of, gone on the journey of learning and understanding at a very deep level that really the only way to change patterns is to take these people in. Um, so I've done a lot of work on that. So I kind of want to hear your opinion on this as you've developed as a facilitator or before you learned about this work.
So do you mean if I'd had any pushback against letting somebody else back into my system?
Or just seeing like if you were in workshops and seeing like if they brought in someone who was really hard to love or did something terrible.
So starting with my own personal family, I think I've been incredibly lucky because for me this work comes naturally. I've had a really lovely upbringing, so I don't carry some of these very big traumas that some of my clients come with. And part of my learning has been to open up my heart to those who can't just look at their parents, their grandparents with a loving heart. And so my biggest learning has been to go, actually, for me, this was easy. For me, that's why I love being in this world, in this work, sorry. And it's not so easy for everyone to do because some people have not had the loving upbringings that I knew. And yet I could see that their life wasn't working. I could see that if they could open up their heart, not to what happened to them and not to what they did to them and not to what wasn't good for them, but to something bigger, to something that is much bigger than what happened, then it had a chance of opening up their heart again to healing and actually turning to what was available in the future. And so I think I had to do a lot of work on my own to, in a way, understand what it's like when it's not so easy to open your heart.
Mhm.
And I would say that's been my biggest, I suppose, learning. But I've also seen people repeat, they push back and they just repeat the same painful moments. And then when they could open and thinking that that means it doesn't mean that it was right. It doesn't mean that it was good for them, but it means I can make peace and I can at least turn to that part of life that is still available. And some people push back and then they come back a bit later. And I think the beauty of this work is that, it doesn't matter. They've coped with it and managed it so beautifully for so long. Another year or two, in a way, makes no difference. And I've just learned to just have real patience and compassion for the ones where it's much harder to do.
Yeah, in my book, I have a chapter that talks about good versus bad. And have you heard that story where it's like something like this, it's a farmer and his son, and bad things keep happening, but then it turns out that they end up being a good thing and keep him from going to war. Do you know the story I'm talking about?
No.
Yeah, I actually had this thought yesterday. I knew this was going to come up. So yesterday I was just walking and I had this thought about when I broke my foot. That's the only time I've ever broken a bone. But it was in middle school, and I had a friend who was teaching me how to do a cartwheel because I wanted to be a cheerleader in middle school. And that was the first time I ever tried a cartwheel, and we were like training together, and I broke my foot, and then that kept me from, doing tryouts and stuff because I had to wear this big old boot. And I was just thinking about it, and I was like, man, my life would have gone so differently if I decided to be a cheerleader. I wouldn't have probably had the same relationship that I had. And then just looking at all the domino effects, I would not have been on this path to being a facilitator or have met all the people I've met or traveled where I've traveled if I went down that path. I mean, who's to say? Because I didn't go down that path. Although, if I just really think about it and the butterfly effect, it probably would have looked very different for me. And so at that time, you could probably look at that and be like, oh my God, that was terrible. And really feel like, oh, this is not a good thing. But then years later, I can look back and think, I'm so happy and grateful that didn't happen. Or even like in relationships, we want something so bad and we're like, this is the one, this has to be it. And then we're so devastated when it ends, which that is the right thing. That's a human thing to feel that grief of the loss of something that you really loved. So I don't want to minimize that emotion. Although I do want to say for me, I've looked back and been like, oh, I'm so grateful I didn't get married when I was 18 or something like that. Or like, just my life would have looked so different if I had gone down the path where I thought I should have gone. And like my soul knew better, like, you know, go down a different way. So um that was more what my question was, because I think as humans, we want things to be black and white or good or bad, or this person's evil, or like just for a broad example, like Hitler is always seen as that is the most terrible person um, ever to exist in human history. And I've had to do a lot of work to kind of reframe and see it differently, because this work is about inclusion of all family members and all people. And that's really what allows us to break cycles and change patterns. We don't do it to break the cycle, because that's like contradictory, because you're doing it in order to exclude them. But it's with like real like love to see them in a different way of like what led to their life, what led to these opinions about these people, what led to these things. And I feel like I like to think in that way, but I've noticed not every person is there yet. So that was kind of more my question of do you get where you see clients who have pushback about people who have been excluded? And how did you kind of help them through that? Yeah.
I name it. So I name it. I refuse it all, even if it keeps me. And then we name whatever they come with. And I think that alone can sometimes loosen something.
Yeah, this is so funny. This all happened in Alaska. So yeah, and I keep sharing with people, my teacher shares the 3 steps to healing. And the first one is acknowledge what is, even if it doesn't look pretty. So let's say someone is carrying an illness or a sickness and naming it as, Mom, I will carry this even if it hurts me. And that can just help to create a movement in them, because they're realizing this is what I'm doing. And then the next thing I'll say, sometimes if I feel called to in that moment, is, and I will pass this to my kids. And then that usually they're like, no, I don't want that. And I'm like, well, you have the point of power here. You are the one that can shift this entire thing, not anybody else. And you have the moment here to do so. Um, and then it's free will, so you still can carry it if you'd like to. So this work is not about fixing, resolving everything, but at least, at the very least, making you conscious. Where does it come from? Why do we do it? Um, and that's the loyalty to the family system. It can be very tough to step out. Bert Hellinger calls it belonging to the family. Um, and even my teacher has been doing it for many years, and she's like, I still see it, I still carry it. I've done constellations on this for 10 years, and still the love is so big. So it's not like this will fix every problem, but at least bring you awareness of where it comes from. And sometimes change the pattern. Not all the time, though.
I think there's only a small place, really, isn't it? Small area where we have a bit of room to create a bit of movement. And the rest, we just agree to. And that alone just brings, I think, a settling feeling. Certainly me, it's like I don't have to change all of it. I don't have to be a superhero. I've just got to be present. And when you were talking earlier on, I was just remembering the difference between really naming and agreeing that we do in this work. I feel is very different to the lightweight going, oh, it's all meant to be. And I think we can be so easy and flippant, and it can actually be a secondary way of dealing with the real pain, going, oh, it was all meant to be. Well, no, but that doesn't necessarily relieve. What really relieves is to feel the pain of not getting maybe what you wanted, and then agreeing to that's how it went. And in my experience, that's when somehow something lifts and shifts in us.
Mhm. Yeah. And we all have ways. I still do it. Like running from some of the deeper things. But that's part of it. The healing is acknowledge what is. And facilitators are not perfect. We're not God. So really.
Yeah, not. It's not, we're not meant to be. And I think that's a really good point to, sometimes clients feel that you've done everything, you've integrated all. We don't have to have integrated everything in order to hold our clients. Well, we've got to have done some of our work and enough of our work to be able to hold our clients. And then we have to know what the limits are. We have to know, actually, I don't feel comfortable. I know when I first started, I felt really uncomfortable working with incest. I hadn't quite made peace with some of the sentences, and I hadn't experienced enough as a rep what it really, how much relief you could get for some of those sentences that we give. And only when I'd done enough work as a representative and I could really see that they settled something in me as a rep, I was able to hold other people in that process. So until I could do it, I would just do pieces. There's other pieces we can do. And I still feel for facilitators, it's much safer to do safe piece, one that we can hold and we can completely feel comfortable with whatever comes up, and to go somewhere that we just have our own anxiety coming up. And then we can always steer it slightly to a different place or close early and maybe refer to somebody else.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if we can do that, I feel it's very safe to go and work with anyone.
Yeah, my teacher says you can only take people as far as you've gone yourself. And so all of my training was like, I'm in the hot seat. I'm the client doing all the work. And I love that she taught me in that way because now I can feel for the client when they're in that seat, and I know the the walls that can come up or the fears, and like you feel so very on the spot when you're in the client seat. And you can feel the difference as well when you're in the facilitator seat and you feel the strength of like channeling this thing through. Channeling is not the right word, but receiving the information. Um, yeah, it's a very, very beautiful work. So I would recommend to anybody if you even if you're just interested in this work, being in part of a constellation. And I would say in person. I love in person much more than online. I've only done one online session, and to me it wasn't as moving as what I have seen in person. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. So for me, I was exactly the same. I was very purist. I wanted to be with people. I don't do technology. It's not really my field of expertise. So when lockdown happened, I was clear. I stopped working for a while and I didn't really want to know. I went off and I painted and I did lots and lots of other stuff and really, went into myself. And then my colleagues were saying, you should try this online thing. It really does work. And, you believe in the field. We're all connected. We can do this. And so slowly I came out of this going, this is not for me. And I gave it a go. And I was astonished how well it worked. And I now do probably 50% of my work online, while my preference is always to work in person. There's I would be lying if I said anything else. But the movements in a client can be the same online or in a constellation with, people present, because it's not even about the constellation, it's about what happens here in the client. And we can track that equally in, through Zoom.
Yeah, and that's a good
It's just
point because the one that I've done online, I was not a representative. I was more just kind of a watcher. So maybe it might have been very different if I was a different part of the constellation or if I was doing my own work. And my teacher does share that where you can even do one-on-one sessions through Zoom and still have the same kind of movement. I guess I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where it's like I would always prefer in person if possible. Although I do know it can open up a whole world of other people you might not be able to work with. So, like people from across the world, I mean, if they feel called to work with you, maybe they don't have the means to fly all the way to the UK. Um, but definitely, energy is mm, everywhere. And we can tap into that at any point, anywhere. That's why like psychics, they're like, oh, I can just look at a picture of you and realize, oh, I really like this person, which is what I did with Marilene. I had like 40 people reach out and just something about you. I was like, I really like her. I even told you that was the first thing I said was, I just need to see a picture or video. I saw the
you
video and I was like, okay, let's do it. Because energy is everywhere. And like you said with family systems, it's like I'm not ever alone, and we can feel those people even if they're all the way across the ocean. Um, yeah, and I definitely felt your energy with me as I was preparing for this, and you were kind of preparing to come in with me as well. Did you feel something like that?
even though I told you in our pre-chat, this takes me way out of my comfort zone. I normally keep, small, quiet, do my thing here. And I'm not really sure how it came up on my Facebook feed, your question. And normally I wouldn't even notice, and I certainly wouldn't reply. And I came off and I went, you know what? I'm going to go and just put my name down. It just felt so right.
Yeah, and I told you
There
too,
was something.
like, even the first moment I met you on Zoom was like, ah, my tummy feels warm. Like this is right. You're supposed to be the first one here. And I love that. Yeah,
And
just kind
I
of
want to add something about, working online, which is interesting because when I work online, I don't even look at what people set up generally. I only look at my client. And it creates that kind of connection that we were just talking about. You start to almost communicate with your client, and they can be anywhere. I've worked with people all over the world because you're just tracking them and their body, and they're busy sort of like looking at what they've set up. And it's helped me to come out of the constellation and even needing to know who's facing where, and actually just connecting with the client in that moment and watching their body and watching their facial expression, watching what happens to them. And obviously me as I look at them when they see whatever they're setting up in front of them.
yeah, it's really beautiful work for that purpose. I wanted to kind of pivot a little bit, and for facilitators, I wanted to know if you have any guidance as they're going along the way. For me, that's why I'm really passionate about putting this together just for myself to become a better facilitator. I think it's so much better if we can be exposed to as many facilitators as possible. Um, and then it would make us a better facilitator. So, do you have any advice in your practice, like maybe from the beginning, something you wish you knew that you know now?
Yeah, so I'll only talk from my point of view.
Yeah.
What helped me is to be completely engrossed in this work. So I did the foundation training 3 times. Then I did the second year or second level, I did that twice. And I kept going to every workshop. I kept going to every event that I could. I read every book. I underlined all the sentences. By the end of it, I had 26 pages of, sentences to use from all the different books. And so I just totally engrossed myself in it. And I went initially to quite a wide variety of people. And then I homed in on the ones that I felt most drawn to and that I wanted to learn from. So I personally didn't go to just everyone. I didn't waste my energy once I knew who I wanted to learn with. And then I concentrated just on those that I felt really drawn to. And I just did everything they could offer. And so from some, Judith Hemming, she really helped me with language. I think she's a master in language and how to use them. And my sentences are literally like a 1% compared to hers. And I just try to get as much as I could from her from that point of view. And then others like Franz Rupert and Stefan Hauser, and they won't know this because they wouldn't know me personally, but I've been to their workshops and I've just spent 2, 3, 4 days sometimes just watching them, and you think they're not doing anything at all until I understood they're just present, and they in the field and they hold the field, and if they didn't do this, everything else that's happening wouldn't be possible. And so they really taught me about being present and just watching it, not stepping back and completely letting go, but actually holding it, being present and feeling what's happening and tracking the movements and knowing when to say something and when to just let it be because it was doing its own thing. So I ask my students to go and see different people and then choose the ones that really speak to them and go to, I do feel it helps to go to good facilitators to begin with, to not just to go anyone, because, the higher up, the closer you are to having dedicated your life to this, the more you're going to learn from them. And so you're not repeating mistakes, and you get almost a bit of a download from the brilliance of this work.
I love that. Yeah. You mentioned books, that you were very into reading books. Do you have any references for your favorite ones that you have?
I always recommend Love's Hidden Symmetry by Bert Hellinger. That's sort of like, it's not an easy read. It's not one that you might just read in one go. But I think anyone who wants to facilitate, not people who are just interested, is probably not the best book to start with. But if you really want to facilitate, I think you have to have an understanding, or it's really helpful to have an understanding, and then combine it with acknowledging what is, which is an interview with Bert Hellinger, where some of the more challenging views or where he might have been misunderstood, he gets a chance to actually say it again in his own words. And so those are two for my students that I always say, start with those because they give you such a good foundation. And then there are loads. There's so many now.
And my teacher, I encountered her when she was like 16 years into her journey of facilitating, teaching, and stuff. And her biggest thing was presence, just be present. And I think for her, like, she didn't even want us to like write down notes really. She was just like, you do your best to receive the information as a facilitator versus like taking it apart. Although I do think it's extremely important to at least have the basics and the basis of how does this work. And then from there, as you evolve, it's like, okay, now let it all go. And don't let it be from your head, but allow it to be from your body. And like you said, Stefan Hausner, I was supposed to go to a training of his like this past September actually, but then I didn't end up going. I think it was actually in London. I was supposed to go.
I was there.
You were there. Oh my God. So I was supposed to meet you. How funny is that? Totally. I would have totally like come into contact with you. I was
Wow.
emailing them back and forth. I was about to buy a ticket. And then I think it's because I decided I needed to save for Alaska. so that I had enough to like do the Airbnbs and flights and stuff. And so I just decided not to, but I was totally going to be there. Yeah.
See? See?
How beautiful is that? How funny. Well, the reason is because my teacher said he's the best that she's encountered. Um, because of that presence. Like she said, she's trained with Mark Wolin, and that is also extremely beautiful. And she also said it's very clinical in the way that he approaches and a little bit more mechanical. And that Stefan Hausner is more about being in your body, receiving the information, and then causing like a movement at a soul level that's not from their mind. And so every facilitator has something beautiful to offer, some beautiful gift to offer. And I do agree it's very important who you learn from because I notice in myself, I picked up so many things unconsciously. And I notice, like, if I watch myself back, I've only recorded one, but even if, like, in the moment, I notice myself doing this tiny little thing or saying this little thing, and I'm like, I know where that comes from. That's Sonia. And it is kind of like a family system, and we do learn that, or she shared that, is the teachers pass the love forward when we're talking about the orders of love. And so they're kind of pouring into you everything that came from before them and whoever they've learned from as well. And you want to make sure that you're learning from someone who has been poured into well, I guess, is a good way to put it. Like I notice I'll say something or I'll make this little like look to the side because she learned from someone named Michael Stevenson who does NLP. And she's like a master practitioner in NLP. And he taught her something called Hakalao, where you like look up to the side and it kind of stimulates something in your brain in order to bring you back into your body or be present. And so I notice I'll do this unconsciously, and then I'm like, oh, look at Sonia. So yeah, definitely choosing mentors and people who can help you develop in the best way possible, I guess. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it is very important who we lean into as we receive this work. Yeah.
Yeah.
And certainly, it's been very beneficial to me to lean into really solid people who've been dedicated to this work for so long.
And to always be learning, right? Always be open to
Absolutely.
evolve and grow. And like I said, that's what I really liked about you. Even though you didn't tell me you were that way, I just have this feeling like that's how she is. She's always willing to be a student and to learn, which I've come across because of my age. Some kind of preconceived notions by other facilitators of like, if she doesn't know anything or but I always approach it like I have something to learn always from anybody I encounter, even my clients. Like I'm always open to allowing someone to pour something into me I've never heard before, which I think is why it's so beautiful to start this podcast because I want to receive from all these different facilitators from everywhere and also give that to others too. Yeah, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, there's not a single client I don't think I've not learned from. There's not a single constellation that I've not learned from, even though, and my students and my people know this, I never remember anything. I'm literally, even at the end of the day, they tell me, I was in this constellation and go, which constellation? What happened? Because when you're present, you just can't remember afterwards. And I think part of my homeopathy training helped me with this because at the beginning I was quite overwhelmed. Again, I was very young when I started, I was 24. And so everything I was taking on until one day I made this decision that once I had that made a prescription, it would go in the box and it wouldn't come out until I saw the client again, to the point now where sometimes people come back and I go, oh my gosh, what remedy did I give them? I can't remember what I gave them because I have learned to completely withdraw, but be totally present in the moment I'm with them. And it feels that gives me longevity in its work rather than going towards feeling it's all too much.
So, can you share what are your offerings? So, any classes coming up, retreats, how can people find you, kind of thing?
So I've got all of my training starting in September. The ones here are in person, and I also offer the same online. And my next foundation starts in January 2025. And I run generally smallish groups online, and that will be an 18-day training. And I also have a mentorship program that I've just started, which is for those who have done what I would call level 1, level 2, at least sort of like 2 years of training, and they're now going into practice, or they've been in practice, or they've had a break and they're not sure, and they just want a mentorship. And so I'm only taking 6 students for this. And we meet once a month online. We have 2 days where we're going to meet in person. That's next June. And they also get one-to-one sessions in between. So that a lot of the work is not just happening with them again on their own because they've done 2 years of training and now hands off, but actually something that probably I would have really benefited from is to just have regular contact with someone and be guided throughout that first year.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. I really think it is important for me, my facilitator. I lived with her for an entire year. And so I was extremely like up and close hearing about her stories, and also after we would do like a workshop, we would come together and she would kind of explain to me, because she knew I was training to be a facilitator, of like, this is why I said that sentence, this is what I noticed when this person made this movement. So I really got to like get down to the foundations of her work and what she was doing or why she did something. So it was extremely important and vital to me that I had someone there to kind of, what's the right word? Like really help me to form, like almost like I just pictured like clay, like really getting it in there, all these things. So I think it's very important. She even said she's noticed there's starting to be like online classes, but it's like do it yourself kind of thing. And you don't have a mentor there that's like, or even like watching you do constellations. For like the when she trained me, we had maybe like 3 or 4 other people in the room, and she might even stop the constellation in the middle of me actually facilitating and share, this tiny little thing that she noticed or something I could have done a little better. Or maybe she's noticing I'm not in my body and I can kind of pause and be like, what do I do? How do I do this? And so for me, that was so vital. So she even shares, she would recommend for anybody who's wanting to do this work, uh, that you have a mentor or facilitator there versus you're just like reading something online and then saying I'm a facilitator now. So do you have any thoughts?
I would, yes, I would completely agree with this. And part of what I've added in my level 2 is what I call supervised practice days. So students come in and they practice, and we do exactly this. We go, what order do you think might, what's your hypothesis? What order could this be? What sentences, therefore, are you working towards? Did you notice when this happened, somebody else went down or left, or the energy went completely dead? And so the students or we have pause buttons and we can stop it. We can have a little discussion
Oh, wow.
and then we carry on. And so, going back to our earlier conversation about the receiving in the heart and the understanding, I think we can bring both together. And I do feel there is something about reading and understanding the orders and really knowing the difference between a primary and a secondary emotion. Intellectually, it helps us create a framework. And once we have that, we let it sink into our body, into our heart, into our cells. And then we're not thinking about it, but we have used it to integrate it in us. And then it's much, much easier to pass on and be present with all of this.
Mhm.
And so I like both the heart and the understanding of it. I think it is good to understand why certain things may be more useful or yet less useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And she does have like worksheets and like sheets of like um ways that we could exclude, and like I think like 3 pages of like examples of like this and this. One part of the training that was one of my favorite though, I think because I have trained in psychic, was psychic and mediumship stuff was we had pieces of paper and then you would like fold them up and she would write down like uh, so this representative is a mother who lost a child. And then you would like pick from a little like box or something and you would tune into this energy. And that was like helping you really integrate into the field and to know that it's coming from your body. So you don't actually open the paper, you just hold it and you're like, okay, I'm feeling this. And you come together with the whole group without even looking. And so I would say, like, oh, I'm feeling like I am extremely sad, or something about my baby, or I feel my tummy feels full, whatever it is. And you open it up and you're like, that makes so much sense why I feel that. And so it's like, that was one of my favorite exercises. So do you do something like that?
I don't know.
No, that was my favorite. And that was really where I
Yeah.
think really learned about at a soul level if I'm actually receiving or if it's in my mind from a representation standpoint. And also as facilitators, do you ever step in to represent for people?
I personally don't know.
No, okay. Well,
So
yeah, I do.
um,
Yeah.
I know a lot of facilitators will, and Bert Hellinger, I believe, would represent the mother or the father. And I personally feel uncomfortable with that. So the way I would do it, I would hold the space with a hand there, but I would remain the facilitator. So there is absolutely no confusion as to who I am for the client longer term and for me in the room. And so personally, I don't step in. No, I step next to it. And actually, when I first started, I find it quite easy to pick up energy. So I would get a bit overwhelmed. And we were taught to constantly walk the field. Whereas now I rarely go into the field because I find it's for me enough to just be right on the edge of it and hold it from there rather than go too deep in and then, get what I get times 100.
Mhm. I don't always. It's only in the moments where I'm told this would be beneficial for this client if he stepped in. Because sometimes if it's a one-on-one, having them be able to face a human standing there, I think can be a very deep process, but it's not always. And I love hearing different facilitators. So that's a new thing I've never heard of before, that you kind of hold the space in that way. It's interesting. Um, but I had a point about this. There was something specific I wanted to ask about this. Oh, it was about the exercise. So what I was saying is that really helped me to develop in being able to distinguish that it's not just my mind. Because there's evidence right there, like, yes, this is a real thing that you just saw. And a really, like a real thing you really experienced. Because as you're beginning, you're like, is this just my mind? Is this actually real? But then when you have that evidence, it's like, okay, that was a real thing I experienced. Yeah.
I think for me, it's so beautiful because everyone can represent. And I know the difference when I go to somebody else's workshop and I'm in a holding circle and I might have an idea on the feeling about, what's going on, or I might even have an opinion about what the client there is saying. As soon as I step into a representation, I might have totally different feelings. And I think that's what has really helped me go, no, this is absolutely real. You know, this is not even acting out. And I remember one constellation where the facts were given and we tried to give the sentences that would actually just name the facts about who had given this child away. And the person was going, well, I just can't say it, it doesn't feel real. And then I think it was their father in the end that went, absolutely right, this is absolutely what needs to happen. And so this client went home and said, I'm really confused because, they tried to give the responsibility to the person who gave this child away. And then whoever had more information said, I don't know what you're talking about. That person was dead. They weren't even alive then. It was the father who took responsibility for this. And so I had so many examples like this where even when you think you're working with the facts and the, the field isn't allowing the facts, to be spoken, that probably the facts aren't quite true. And that the representation is correct, that, that person was dead. They weren't even there when this happened. And I remember another time when I was watching a constellation, and it was to do with war, and this person was really high up in the war, a commander or what, and he was meant to see the effect that this was having on his family. And this person was going, absolutely no, I stay with the war, I'm completely loyal to this. And I was getting quite irate with this person, going, oh my gosh, this facilitator, he was very experienced, couldn't resolve it. And eventually this facilitator brought me in for lines, didn't tell me what it was, and said, just find your place. And I remember just standing next to this, general, and going, absolutely agree, completely with you. And I thought, this will never resolve, because I am not going to give up what, the stance that I've got. And I was brought in as the thinking system of that generation and that war. And it just helped me to really understand that it's so easy to have opinions, to have feelings. But when you're brought in, even blindly, you will have a completely different experience. And it is such a gift, because you don't get to experience this in real life, do you? Mm-hmm. You only get this if you step into somebody else's field and life and get to go, oh, that's what it's like to be somebody different. And if I was them, I would do exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm caught in that field, not in my field.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Yeah, my teacher has shared stories as well from her workshops, or when she was standing in as representative, and she was like, I think it was actually someone who had done something to a child, and he was an adult, and she stepped in as this perpetrator, and from the outside, she was like, oh, I wouldn't like just all these judgments, right? Like we talked about earlier, excluding people who have done things. And she stepped in as him. And she said that that completely changed her whole viewpoint, because she experienced like so much love, probably for his family system and what he was following and repeating the patterns of. But she said that completely changed her whole viewpoint on that. Although it's not to say those things are okay, but what she said was she kind of dropped some of the judgments that she had before because of that experience. And it really opened her up as a facilitator to be able to hold space for things like this as well. So it is very powerful work. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So any closing thoughts? I know it's getting late for you there. I would love to have you back though, because I love your energy. I love how passionate you are. And also, like I said, when I was reaching out for facilitators, my number one thing, because that's how I was taught, is do this work justice and have honor, have reverence, and know that it's very sacred what we do. So my number one thing as I created this podcast was like, I only want facilitators who understand and like really want to do their own work and have ethics with their clients, because that's kind of what I want to spread with this particular work, is people who have the highest intentions for their clients. So I would love to have you back eventually. Yeah.
I would love to come back, and we will stay in touch, whatever.
Sure. That's what I said when we met yesterday, was I still want to be connected in some way, which it sounds like we're supposed to be, because we're supposed to be at the same workshop. That's so funny. I was so called to be there, but it just didn't work out this time. But I will one day, because like I said, my teacher said he's her number one on the list of facilitators to see. So I have to see him someday.
You have to, yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
But I was there with you in spirit. You were there for me too. So any closing thoughts or things that you'd like to share about this work, facilitators, anything at all before we close?
I think anyone can do this training, whether you want to facilitate or whether you want it as a personal journey. I think doing at least a foundation in this work, it really is a journey. It takes you to places that you haven't been before, and it can change not just you, but your family's life, your work life, your all the fields that we are connected with. And for me, it's all about reconciliation with ourselves, with what is, with the place we're in. And it is, for me, the most beautiful thing to do. But I've also had to learn that it's not for everyone. Not everybody wants to be a facilitator. Not everybody wants to take this work out. And I think that's perfectly okay too. You can just be part on this journey. And I've had people who've trained with me, and as part of that, they've realized where their passion really lies, and they've gone on to do this. And if that's what this work does, isn't that amazing? It doesn't mean you have to become a facilitator just because you train in this. For me, it's definitely what I will be doing until way beyond 65, because I can't imagine, in terms of my work, not passing on this for as long as I can.
It's like life altering, completely transforms your view of anything you experience in life or what your relationships are like with others. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what I've liked, it there is, you could say there's a spiritual part to it, but there is also a very grounding part to it. It doesn't take you off into this, lightweight spirituality. For me, it's brought me into real, with all of it, everything, not just all good, but there is there's a beauty when everything is allowed
Mhm.
and included.
And I feel like that's what spirituality, air quotes that word, really
Mhm.
is. It's allowing for all of it in
Yeah,
the entire human experience.
yeah.
Yet someone shared with me, like, oh, well, I think they said, I'm angry. And I said, well, that is spiritual. Everything is spiritual in the grand scheme of things, because that gives you information, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet there is a difference, isn't there, between judging somebody else and making a judgment for myself. So if I stop taking responsibility for what is right or wrong for me, then I'm not fully in this world. And really, what this work helps me is to take responsibility and to make a judgment of this or that. But I'm not judging others in their choices. And I'm bound to them if they have to carry the responsibility of something that maybe has had bigger consequences for them. And I think that for me has been life changing, to really get the difference between that, not just say it's all good and in a way disappear, but actually going, no, it has consequences. Everything has. And I'm going to learn to hold this, and I'm going to hold that with respect, and I'm going to respect others for the choices they make.
I love that. There's a guy named Tiziano Squarso. I think he's from Italy. He's a facilitator. Do you know who this is?
I've seen him, yes.
Okay, how funny. I've been emailing him back and forth as well. So maybe that's something in the future for this podcast. But
Mm.
I've seen something where he talks about forgiveness and how it's, and my teacher shares the same thing. So for me, it really resonated. And that's how I do my work as well, especially when I'm working with children and parents. I'll notice the child wants to take care of the parent, and they're like, I forgive you, kind of thing. And I'm like, no, no, no. Because really, what you're doing, you're stepping into the position of the parent still and still excluding. So I really like to point that out, that it's
Yeah.
not about forgiveness. And in my development in spirituality, that was how I began. It was like, oh, I just have to forgive everybody. And really, what you're saying is almost like I'm better than you, and so I have the power to forgive you, kind of thing. And that's what I love about this work and the teachers. It's like it's not about forgiveness; it's about acceptance and acknowledgement of even the the consequences of your actions and how that hurt me deeply, and also acknowledging our hurt as well. Yeah.
And actually, I personally don't even call it acceptance. I take it further and say agreeing. When I accept, I sometimes there's a way of accepting that makes me feel weak, that makes me into, I give up. But actually to agree that it could have only been that way because this is how it went. And therefore I'm going to become the creator of this by agreeing and going, this is what happened. This is how it has to be. And therefore I agree to it. Gives me even more strength than just accepting. And I thought a lot about the forgiveness as well. And the way that I hold it at the moment, and maybe that changes again, is exactly as you say, that I teach and I believe that forgiving lightheartedly makes me far too big and makes the other person, oh my God, if they ever make another mistake, they're so going to hear it because I was so good and they're so bad. And it generally doesn't work. However, I do feel that there is a very high level of forgiveness. And that means that forgiveness, the way I understand it, is that when I have completely agreed to something, when I have completely integrated every part of what happened and seen it and lived it and allowed it to be part of all of it, then in a way, forgiveness happens in the sense that I forget. It goes. It doesn't need to be mentioned again because it's kind of like complete. And so to me, that very high level of forgiveness is that to me. But that happens because we don't forgive in the weakened level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. It's about internal resolution with whatever it is and what happens.
Yeah.
And that's where the peace happens. So
Yes.
I love that. I've encountered quite a few facilitators. It's like that. I'm happy to work with the ones that have come to that. Yeah. And also to learn from, that's a new point that you shared. That was beautiful. So I learned something today. Thank you. How beautiful. Well, I don't want to keep you on for too long. Can you share, just to kind of close up, your website, how people can find you? Yeah, if you're ready.
So I have two websites. One is for my private practice, for one-to-one work, for my workshops, for homeopathy, and that's www.soul, that's in the soul in us, solutions focused. So it's all one word, solutions.focus.co.uk. And then I've got another website for all of my trainings online and in person, and that's www.familyconstellationsjourney.com.
Beautiful. I'm so happy that I met you. I just want to say thank
I'm
you.
so honored.
Thank you for being brave and for leaving a comment and being willing to come in here with me and share about this work. I'm really excited to kind of be a part of being able to spread this in a different way than it has been before. So thank you for being the first ever.
Thank you for doing this for all of us. All of us. I'm really honored, and you're just doing beautiful work. Your energy is just gorgeous. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be able to help not only the public to see about this, but also to help facilitators become even better facilitators, and myself too. Yeah, all of us together. Yeah. All right. Well, I will talk to you soon. Like I said, we'll keep in touch. I'm going to meet you in person one day, even if it's
I think we will.
the workshop together. So I will meet
I'm
you.
sure we will.
All right. Well, cool. I'm excited
Amazing.
to see you have coming up soon.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's absolutely beautiful what you do.